Thanks for tuning in to Minds of Tomorrow. I'm your host, Luis Acevedo, and with me today I have Walrus. He is the brass of How to Pulse. He is also a prominent voice in the Pulsechain and the Pulsex voice chats on Telegram. He's educated a lot of people on the projects. And, he's a big truther when it comes to Hex, I would say. He's a realist when it comes to these projects. So I appreciate that about him, and I appreciate him coming on the show. So thank you very much, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course, man. It's always important to have very resolute and strong and vocal people. And until we get one of those, you guys are going to have to put up with me. So I'll do my best. I'll try to get things as clear as I can with the least amount of slant. There's a lot of very interesting things that go on with crypto. And I think this is some of the most interesting stuff going on right now. So a lot of people have questions, and we have an interesting sort of dynamic between people who've been in the space for a long time, who have a very particular perspective. And then because of Pulsechain and Pulsex reaching out to so many new audiences, people are just now tuning into the verbiage and a lot of things that some of the community is comfortable with. So there's a lot of moving pieces right now. So it's an interesting time.
Yeah, for sure. And it's an exciting time to be in crypto. I mean, there's a whole new ecosystem emerging right in front of our eyes. But before we go into that, I want to, go into a little more about what you do with How to Pulse. So when you go to the website, you go to the About Us page, you see the team. And as I introduced you, it says, you're the brass. What the hell does that mean?
Man, so those guys are very, very humble. What they really mean is that I'm the mouthpiece. I'm just the guy in front that talks a lot. I spend a lot of time in some of the chats. Those guys are incredible. They're the ones doing all the actual dev work. They're going to participate in a lot of the things that will make Pulse functional in the future. So I try to get the message out there. I try to speak very, very clearly about what we have going on when it comes to the outreach in different communities and marketing. But those guys are the ones really, really building stuff. And that's true of most of crypto. For every loud person you hear speak, they're usually parroting things that much more intelligent people told them. So, and that's very, very true of myself when it comes to both the How to Pulse team and other great members in the community. So as much as I appreciate all the gratitude and, being the brass, I'm sitting on the shoulders of giants. Those guys are incredible. They do the real hard work.
Yeah, man, for sure. And it's an important role you have to be able to articulate these very complex ideas. That takes a level of intelligence that's above average too. That's an important skill to have, is to be able to communicate. So how did you end up in that position? Like, how did you join the team? What's the backstory to that?
So a little bit, I don't want to give too much specifics on one side. I was an admin in a lot of the chats for a long time. And there is a very particular view there that is a little more manicured. And I tend to not follow any group thought very well. I'm going to call spade, as you brought up a little bit. Sometimes I rub feathers the wrong way. It doesn't mean that I'm always right, but I'm always going to tell you what I think. So as I was transitioning out of just being an admin role, at that point, I had spent a lot of time with the community and built a lot of really, really strong relationships. And I was sort of looking for, okay, I speak in the voice chats quite a bit. That resonates a lot with a lot of people. It resonates with myself a lot too. I like to do things that scale, because that's what it takes to be successful in the world right now. But most of the time, I'd rather do this right here. I'd rather just speak one-on-one or in very small groups. That's where I personally feel very comfortable. So when it comes to the streaming stuff I've done, I'd actually never been on a single YouTube stream until about 3 months ago. It was the first time I was ever on a recorded stream, even though I spent a ton of time in the voice chats with a lot of guys. So as I was sort of looking for that next era on what I was going to do to participate in the community, I just stepped away from some of the admin roles because I was involved in a lot of other projects, most of which not even fiscally. I just thought they were really interesting. I wanted to see these guys push an envelope and build cool stuff. So as I realized that my worldview wasn't as aligned with the very strict kind of ethos that those guys were running, the How to Pulse guys reached out, and a few of those guys I'd been friendly with beforehand, and I knew they did incredible stuff. You can see the website, the tools, these guys are clearly hyper confident, and they reached out and were, they're like, hey, we've seen you for a long time. Now that you're not an admin, now you can feel free to join us. And I was like, man, I'd be more than happy to. So since then, we've done a lot of cool stuff. They have the things they're doing, I don't think the community has a full appreciation for, because the community is so tight knit that they already know, right? If you just go jump in a chat, ask a question about RH, almost everyone knows where he's from. They've watched every stream. They know about his watches. I mean, again, the community is so close that half the time, if you go in the community, you can hear them. They'll parrot me. Like, they've heard me say the same thing 10 times. They know how to say it. They've heard Jesse from Liquid Loans. They've heard him spill on collateralized. Again, our community is so close that we sort of pop a B when it comes to security. If you go in the voice chat, I guarantee you there's 5 people in there that can quote Papa B for 10 minutes word for word. They've got it figured out. They've already heard the guys talk, right? So, but with How to Pulse, they understand that for a network to work, you have to network, right? You have to have network effect. We have to push this thing out beyond our little sphere. So it's a lot of marketing to other communities. It's trying to reach out to people who aren't already on the same page as us, whether it's Twitter, doing interviews, doing live content like this. I know you do a rather eclectic group of content, and hopefully there'll be people that don't already know me, that don't already know Pulse, that don't already know our community, and resonate with the messages here. And we can be more inclusive and bring people in. So a lot of what How to Pulse does is about reaching sort of outside of what we're already doing very well. The community is so strong and so tight knit, which is great once you're there, but it's kind of hard to breach in sometimes, right? So what we've been trying to do is leverage what is already fantastic in the community, because of Jesse and Papa B, guys like yourself, Corey, all these great people and great minds we have. I know that if they get onto How to Pulse and then they come into the ecosystem, they're going to resonate with our message and what we're building and all these things. So all I have to do is just get them in, right? So the capture rate's going to be high, because when you're telling the truth, when you're building great products, when you have amazing leadership, and when you have very vibrant communities, that's easy. I just need to get them in the door. So How to Pulse has been about just trying to get people in front of the fantastic community that's here.
Yeah, and with that, you guys do a lot of education. You visit the website and it has a lot of breakdowns of very complicated things, especially for people who are new to crypto. It's like learning a new language, essentially. So
it's very much so.
Yeah, and so that's really cool. And then the other thing that I really like that you guys did was start a market cap site, because a lot of Hexicans have complained about the gatekeeping that Hex has experienced, which I think is legitimate. I think the Hex community, the Hex coin itself, has been unfairly ranked in a lot of these big market cap sites. And what I like to see are, communities that will solve problems as opposed to just complain about it. And that's something that I've known How to Pulse. You guys have been doing. And actually, MOT Media, when we do our crypto updates in the morning, we always take a snapshot and send people to How to Pulse for the market cap, because it's very legit. Cool.
So and again, another one of those old saying is, being healthy in an unhealthy society is no moniker of health, right? So that's something when it comes to a lot of these sites, is that when you do things that are the unit of measure cap in the first place is already a pretty flawed metric. So when we talk about it in our world, we actually don't care. I could care less what the market cap of Hex is, but other people care. And I basically need to use it as a billboard, right? So the lower you are in market cap, the more upside it has. It's a gem. It's that all that sort of language. The higher it is, it's more successful. It's very established. It's a blue chip. It's all these things. Now, most of that stuff is untrue and incorrect. But once again, back to that same message. If I can get your attention, then I can educate you. I can bring you into a community, and we can try to keep moving people along their journey, right? So if you're looking at market cap, then at least you're looking into crypto. Okay, great. So now I don't have to get you over the crypto hurdle, right? You're not a no coiner. All right, let me integrate your worldview. Let me show you how these things really move, right? And then, so we keep moving people along their journey and trying to educate, because that education is so important. You can see this another way. This reflects is really reflective of the world, in that systems that are complex typically only work in more educated societies, right? So we see this with democracy. We see this with financial systems. Places where the average education is low, it's very, very difficult to run very, very complex systems, right? So especially if the baseline is very complex, right? Even understanding ETH rocks or a meme coin, right? The very lowest level of crypto, we get used to it and we're like, oh, they're junk. Those are very low logic systems. guys, those are very difficult things. Those are very hard things to wrap your head around if you're not from this space. So then trying to transition people into understanding the difference in, why is this trustless? What do admin keys mean in this context? Admin keys aren't even one thing. There's what these liquidity pools, is this thick? Is this thin? What does dollar value mean? There's so many moving pieces here that the more complex it gets, the more educated sort of the audience has to be to appreciate differences, right? So the education serves to not only allow people to move up the rungs, feel comfortable, participate at a very high level, but it's also needed to really make these things sing and for people to understand the differences in bad projects and good projects. So the education is very gratifying, very rewarding, and it's very, very functional to adoption. And, sometimes even if people are participating, let's say you got a good job and you're making, I don't know, 70, 80K plus, depending on where you're at, that kind of thing. Maybe you're willing to throw $500 at AMC because you heard we're gonna crush the shorts.
Right.
You know what I mean? You can get behind that. You feel good, or you're like, oh, the Shiba dog. I can't remember the dude's name, whatever that dog's name is. Oh, he's cool. That's fun. I can throw $1,000 at it. That's a very different level of education and comfort than saying, talking to the missus and saying, hey, I'm gonna put $10,000 into fake money. Like, that's a very, very different value proposition. So that's where that education is important. Again, about bumping people along the lines. It's taking a no coiner into getting into something. It's taking someone who's in, what we would consider to be a less viable, less true financial instrument. Let's bump them down the line. Let's get people out of a centralized exchange and into a hardware wallet. Let's get hardware wallet users into, using something really trick like Graphene OS and multi-sig and this really, really cool stuff. So we're just trying to keep funneling people down the line and making sure that we have the highest caliber participants and also a large audience appeal. So the education's tricky. It takes a lot of time and it's very important.
For sure. And it's just so important. It's so important because when I try to explain crypto to people, I always tell them, when you're really getting into crypto, you have to understand you are taking all the risk. You are completely responsible for all your money. There's not a bank you can call. There's nobody you can call to be like, hey, absolutely, I sent this to the wrong address. It's like, if you do that, you lose the money. That's something you have to accept. So learning, just getting people onto their own private wallet where they have their private keys is a huge hurdle in and of itself. Just going from Coinbase to getting a MetaMask or a hardware wallet, whatever you're going to do. So, definitely what you guys are doing, I think, is really awesome because people are going, especially as crypto grows. I mean, we have a multi-trillion-dollar market cap in crypto right now, something like that. And so it's only going to keep growing. And so the education is needed. And I feel that a lot of times people who have been in it for years, I've been in crypto since 2016. I think from one of the interviews I heard from you, 2014 is when you got in. And so, for guys like us, we may take it for granted that, we've been in the space for a long time and this should be like second nature just to know this already. And so to actually have a team that's putting together, information that can help the masses funnel in to this new asset class that is truly amazing and will help, get people, I believe, the financial freedom that almost everybody's seeking. So it's very important what you guys. Yeah. Now, before we get into Pulsex, I want to talk about Pulsechain because I kind of think Pulsechain is important to understand before we talk about Pulsex, because Pulsex is going to be on Pulsechain. So what is Pulsechain?
Sure. So the commercial view, the 30-second encapsulation for those that, maybe you're just looking at these assets as something speculative or just don't have that level of knowledge, is what it is it's a network, right? This is an actual blockchain that allows projects to get built on top. So, Bitcoin is sort of the original blue chip, but it has very low functionality, right? RH makes the joke, you can't program it to wake you up in the morning. It doesn't do anything, right? It has send and receive in mind. That's it. It's very, very simple logic. Then you have something like Ethereum that people are used to. And Ethereum is a proof of work chain that has all these token projects on top. Pulsechain is basically that next rendition of what networks can be. So it allows more transactions to happen. It allows those transactions to happen cheaper. It removes some of the waste that comes from miners. So for people that aren't as familiar on those, people have sort of seen those videos and seen all those rows of graphics cards and water running and these loud sounds from all these miners. That requires a lot of power, a lot of time, a lot of hardware, and that gets removed. So Pulsechain is essentially just that next rendition of Ethereum with a lot of improvements that make it very functional. But essentially, all that people really care about is that it's very, very cheap to transact on. It's compatible with almost everything they're using now, and it has improved tokenomics. So if you're talking about the coin itself, it's going to be very valuable. So those are sort of the simplicity of it. It's an EVM fork, and again, it's a long rabbit hole, but that's the simplicity of it. It's just that next progression of technology. It's very inexpensive to use. It's fantastically coded. It's great stuff.
Right. Yes, for sure. And I don't think you mentioned it in what you were saying, but I think another important thing to go off of with the Pulsechain here is that, or include rather, is the fact that everything that was built or is built on Ethereum is going to be copied over to Pulsechain. And I think that that's very crucial to know when we talk about Pulsex, because you're getting the largest airdrop in crypto history if you own an ERC20 or ERC721. I know there was talks in the beginning that there may be a few that aren't going to be copied over because they're scams, but I'm not sure where we sit as far as that goes. But yeah, so it's going to be the largest airdrop in history once the mainnet releases. And so with that, what is Pulsex?
So Pulsex is a fork of the Uniswap code, which is the same as Sushi and Pancake and Traders. All these are DEXs, which is a decentralized exchange. So even for those that have never operated on those platforms originally, if you're in your MetaMask or a lot of the other wallets have swap functions, those are just interfacing with the DEXs that we're discussing here. So those DEXs are the actual code that's being run to allow you to swap from a token to another. Pulsex is unique in the sense that it will be the largest and most liquid DEX on Pulsechain, and it will have some really neat functionality. One is that because the majority of liquidity is there, it should have very low slippage and have sort of a very healthy ecosystem just innately from a DEX. The tokenomics of the coin itself are very, very interesting. And also there's a really interesting thing it might be a little tricky depending on the listeners. This is the AMM fixer bot. Mm-hmm. So because Pulsechain is a fork of Ethereum, all the liquidity pools are being copied as well. As you said, it's the biggest airdrop in history. The reason that functions that way is it's a actual system state copy. You're going to take all of Ethereum and then literally lay it over onto Pulsechain. That whenever you have the fork, the snapshot, mainnet going live, all these are the same event where you have a block of information, right? It's a blockchain. So it's the last update where everything is, all the smart contracts, the last update, the last save, the last time someone hit the save button at the end of the video game. That's the beginning of Pulsechain. So that includes all these liquidity pools and everything. And those are all going to be adjusted by this fixer bot for the supply in Pulsechain, because there's a lot more Pulse than there is Ethereum. And then they will all be moved into Pulsex. So as soon as essentially this Pulsechain is this launch event, everything's live, you're going to have massive amounts of liquidity all moved inside of this protocol. So if you're a holder of the coin, you're going to see a lot of positive price action, which I'm sure we'll get into a little more in depth in a second. And that'll be where the vast amount of trading happens on top of Pulsechain.
So I want to talk a little bit more about that bot, that harvesting bot. Could you explain that a little bit? Because that's something that it took me a little bit to understand as well. So is it harvesting, all the coins that once it's launched on Uniswap, the forks on Uniswap and all that on Pulsechain, or is it harvesting before the fork?
So it gets a little tricky there between, so the short version of how this thing works is that when we say it's a bot, somehow like a lot of times people think that it has like special things going on. All a bot does is automate what you would do if you did something, right? Mm-hmm. So essentially this Pulsex is going to be a big store where you can go in and swap and buy all these tokens. And the fixer bot is basically going to go to Walmart, Target, and whatever the grocery stores around these things. It's going to go buy all that stuff up and then bring it into the Pulsex store. So the way that functions is it will actually be after the launch. This fixer bot's going to go through and it's going to go to Uniswap V2, probably V1, possibly V3. It's a little different because it's not a symmetrical system, and Sushi Swap. And it's going to go there with a big bag of Pulse and start buying everything up. So it will buy, when we say harvesting and all these things, I just want to make sure we're being clear for a lot of the audience. Essentially, it just buys these things up, right? So there's a pool where there was ETH and whatever ERC20 project that you can think of. And it's going to literally buy all these PRC20s up. And a PRC20 is just the copy of an ERC20. So all these PRC20s are going to all get purchased. So it just literally goes through with this freshly minted Pulse and buys out all these liquidity pools. And then it reissues that same liquidity inside of Pulsex at the correct ratio for the supply. So if you had say 1 ETH to, we'll say the price is 3,000. So when we say that ETH is $3,000, what we really mean is that there's 1 ETH for every 3,000 USDC that's in that pool, right? So Pulse has a 1.2 million times the supply. So to fix that same ratio, so it would now be 1.2 million Pulse to that same 3,000 USDC. And so that's the correcting ratio, and that's the reason this bot's going through. So all of that will be moved into Pulsex. And it does that for a few reasons. One is to correct the supplies, right? Because if you didn't go through and correct, all of these PRC20s would be very undervalued. They'd be valued at 1 Pulse when that ratio should be 1.2 million. So you're essentially raising the price of all these PRC20s to be in the same relative nature they were to the native coin. And then also, not everyone cares about their users, their contracts, and wants these things to participate. So by purchasing up all that liquidity and then moving it over to Pulsex, it also stops other communities and sort of more prominent people from being able to remove liquidity from a project. So, we'll just say there's Coin A. Maybe the dev team and the larger players in Coin A don't like us. They don't want you to be able to participate. They don't want you to network with low fees. Maybe they remove their liquidity and make it basically impossible to trade. Essentially, this would be, I don't want to say it's a rug pull, but a similar nature to a rug pull. You have this value, there's this liquidity, and it gets pulled. So once it's been purchased by the bot and then put into Pulsex, you correct these ratios, you make this very, very strong liquid AMM, and you also stop people from being able to remove liquidity and allowing a lot of these smaller communities and other places to contribute and actually interact on Pulse.
Gotcha. So is it fair to say it's sort of like a vampire attack then, what's taking place with this?
Oh, Ruth, we got to be careful about letting Ruth talk to too many people. That's a very, very, very intelligent person. So the vampire attack is really about trying to pull value from one thing to another, and you can do that by bonding liquidity. So if we'll use Chainlink. That's a pretty common one. So if you're a Link Marine, you're sitting here with 1,000 Link, they have this value, right? So again, that value is derived from these liquidity pools, right? So when we say that, I don't know what the value of Link is off the top of my head, but let's say that, if Link's $1, that means it's in a liquidity pool with 1 Link to 1 USDC. If there's $10 million in liquidity, that means there's 5 million USDC and 5 million Link because it's valued at $1. So you can create liquidity pools on Pulse with these new copies and actually kind of drain the life and pull that value over by putting those in a liquidity pool in 1-to-1, right? So we say that USDC is worth $1. So if it's in a pool 1-to-1, then whatever's on the other side is worth $1. So if you take Link and you put it in a 1-to-1 pool with the Pulse Link, it's worth whatever the Link's worth because there's a pool at which I can trade them 1-for-1, right? So if I can trade 1 P Link for 1 E Link and 1 E Link for 1 USDC and 1 USDC for $1, then it's that transitive property. Then 1 Pulse Link's now worth $1. So the idea on some of these vampire attacks and really, really kind of exotic things is that you can bridge in these ERC20s and then pair them in liquidity pools with these copies that you got for free, right? So you not only are you able to now interact on the chain that's very inexpensive, not only are you able to provide liquidity where you only paid for one side, but now you're also adding value to the other side of your bag that you got for free, right? So if if you're a Hexagon and I just gave you double your bag of PHEX, you would love for that PHEX to be very, very valuable. And one way to do that is to bond those together in a liquidity pool. So that's the idea on those vampire attacks. It's about attaching liquidity and values together. And the thicker that bond is, the deeper that pool is, the tighter those prices are held together.
Gotcha. Okay, gotcha. And so now let's bring it back a little bit because I feel like we're getting very complicated here. So
That's technical
with,
stuff. That's technical
yep,
stuff.
yep. So with Pulsex, it's this DEX, as we've already talked about, this decentralized exchange. But there are many other ones, like we've already mentioned, Uniswap, SushiSwap, PancakeSwap. What makes Pulsex different from them? Aside from the fact that it's going to have the most liquidity on Pulsechain, what are some unique qualities that it has?
So there's an interesting thing between what sells and what works, right? So in some ways, it's not revolutionary by design, because revolutionary means new and untested, right? If I told you that we're going to send you in space and that we have, a rocket that's extremely tested, it's 10 years old, we've done this 100 times, or I told you there was the most revolutionary rocket ever, I want the old rocket. Send me the one that's got 10 years of experience. I don't want the revolutionary rocket. That's not me. Don't send me into space that way. So in some ways, you want to look at what the real goal is. And a lot of what we have on Pulsex isn't revolutionary, because you don't want to use revolutionary stuff when you're trying to trust it to billions and billions of dollars, right? So most of the code is just forked over from Uniswap, which is the same as Sushi and Trader Joe's and Pancake. So it's code that's already working, because if it didn't work, it would have broken in all these places, right? And it's the best code because the next guy forked that code, and the guy after him forked that code, and the guy after him forked that code. So this is a very battle hardened sort of core set of parameters that work. So where Pulsex does differ is in the tokenomics, which are extremely cool, and they're simple in that they're very easy to kind of get, and they're very easy to overlook. So in Pulsex, you're going to actually have two tokens. You're going to have the reward token, which is yet to be named, and that's what you would get from yield farming as a reward for providing liquidity. And then you're going to have the actual Pulsex token, which has two main properties. One is the buy and burn. The way the buy and burn works is that whenever you transact on any of these dexes, they have a swap fee. So when you transact, there's the gas fee to interact on whatever network you're on, and then there's the swap fee that the protocol itself charges. So in Uniswap, it's 0.3%. In Pancake, it's 0.25. Sushi is right in that same range. Most of them are all around that, essentially anywhere from a quarter of 1% to a third of 1%. Where Pulsex sort of differs a bit is in how that fee gets moved around. So assuming that fee is $100, just for a nice round number, $76 of that swap fee would go to the liquidity providers. So whatever pair you're interacting in, as people trade in that pair, you get paid the liquidity fees, right? And that's the same as every protocol. Anyone who's ever provided liquidity or swapped in and out has either paid these fees or received them. 3% is going to go to the dev address, and that's our no expectations. Those guys could go cure cancer. They could snort it off in big thick lines if they want. They can do whatever they want with that stuff, right? The magic when it comes to Pulsex is the 21% of that fee that is an actual buy and burn. So that means that it's not just burning, but it is buying on market. So if I have a $100 swap fee where I bought something with USDC and swapped it out, I would take 21 USDC. It would purchase on market out of the liquidity pool. It would buy PLSX and then burn it. Where that can be confusing is that typically when you see these systems, people are used to seeing deflationary and they're used to seeing buy and burns, but they're usually in systems that are still net inflationary. So we see the burn in Ethereum, and they're like, oh, we're burning Ethereum, but it's still inflating. So it's just a metric that controls inflation, right? So burning Ethereum sounds very powerful, but if I told you it's just inflating slower, it doesn't have the same ring, and it shouldn't. And it's the same thing in Cake. So Cake has a similar function, but it's still net inflationary. If you look at the supply of Cake on a log scale, it does slow down, but it's still growing. So it doesn't have the same impact on the tokenomics in those systems. But Pulsex doesn't inflate. It just deflates. Once the sacrifice phase is over and Pulsex is actually launched, it is impossible to mint more Pulsex. So the reason this buy and burn is such a powerful price action is that it's not just deflating, because deflation doesn't really cause an acute action, right? If I take Pulsex out of my wallet and send it to a burn address, nothing happens. Now there is less market, there's less to be sold, so it does have an effect sort of on the marketplace over time, but nothing happened right then. The price was $1, and I take 1 billion Pulsex and send them to a burn address. Price is still $1. Nothing moved. Nothing interacted with that pool. But there is less on market later on. Where Pulsex is special is that it buys right then. So you have an acute price action right there. Boom, it purchased out of the liquidity pool. Price goes up, and then it gets burned. So you have this really, really strong mechanic of where if you look at the volume that you see in like Uniswap and SushiSwap, that would translate to hundreds of thousands of dollars a day in buy pressure. Like this is the equivalent of going and getting, maybe not a whale, let's call them a dolphin. That buy and burn, if we got to the volumes that are around that you see in SushiSwap and Uniswap, this is a dolphin buying their bag and then burning it every single day. And it does this whether the token is 1 penny, 10 cents, $1, $10, because it's not an educated buyer. It's just buying. If the liquidity pools are thin and it's pushing the price up, it doesn't matter. If the price is what we would consider as investors very, very expensive, it doesn't matter. It still buys and pushing that price up. So that buy and burn keeps deflating the supply over time, but it is very acutely powerful right there and allows this thing to not just grow in price, but you have a token that would go up in price if no human being ever bought it. If no one ever bought Pulsex could still go up in price. Then that's very unique mechanics. The other is the Dow Voting. Now, the vast majority of people, if they don't know what Dow Voting is and don't understand how it works, it's a little complicated, but essentially it's just voting. But what's powerful about this is it's just similar to the real world. People will spend money to try to get you to vote for them, whether you vote or not. So it's part of the utility, the market value, the use case of the coin, whether or not you actually vote or not.
And your ability to vote is predicated on how many Pulsex tokens you have. Is that correct?
We haven't seen the actual layout on that just yet.
Okay.
We'll see how that plays out. It's going to be a pretty interesting mechanic. So we'll see how that plays out. The voting itself hasn't been worked out. But for most people, that concept isn't, it's funny. It's very powerful for price action, but it's not actually especially important just yet until we get to see more of what pools will be dictated. But it's likely to be based on your holdings. Okay.
And now, at the risk of having a stupid question here, what would be the purpose of holding the Pulsex token aside from just, there's automatic buy pressure, so the price goes up?
So I would think of it as essentially holding shares of the protocol itself. So if you hold a ton of shares in any stock, the reason you would hold them is to either have influence on what happens at the company or number go up, right? So when you have this buy and burn inside of Pulsex, it's very similar to being a shareholder in the protocol. The more traffic that goes through, the more valuable that coin becomes. The more valuable the coin becomes, the more valuable the voting rights are, and so on and so forth. So it essentially works like shares in a company. If I owned 20% of Tesla, or what is it? I think Elon owns like 20%. So if I own 51% of Tesla, I could go fire Elon Musk. Now, I probably wouldn't do that. He's a pretty savvy guy. We probably want to keep him around. But that's the idea on that voting, is that you would have control over where these incentive tokens go and how they function. So it's, again, it functions very much like being a stakeholder in the protocol.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And now, we touched on the Dow token, the Dow Voting, and from what I've read from the little blog post that has been circulating for a little while now, is basically the voting will be based on who is going to, what liquidity pair is going to get the incentives, and how much of the incentives. Now, obviously, there's a lot we don't know, but from what we do know, do you have any opinions as to what that liquidity pair would probably be? If you just had to take a guess. I know it's pure speculation.
No, I got the question. So the magic is what would I be voting on and why would I actually care, right? So where you can do these things, there's a handful of cases that jump out right away as being very obvious examples. So one is the vampire attack and wanting these PRCs to be very, very valuable. So the way you do that is to incentivize those pools, right? So if EHEX, PHEX is a pair we want to participate in, then we can pay out a large amount of that reward token, right? If you have something along the lines of, let's say Hex, right? Hex is something we're having very manicured liquidity pools is something we pride ourselves on. It gives us a lot of control for price volatility to the upside. So you can actually control that liquidity pair by incentivizing or de-incentivizing the pair. So if there's a lot of liquidity and you're nullifying the volatility to the upside, right? The thicker that liquidity is, the more money it takes to actually move up that value, right? So we could take away incentive from a pool that has too much liquidity there because you're nullifying the advantage. So the other one is the opposite. Let's say there's a pool that's extremely risky and that's why people are not participating. You could actually add incentive there and get people to provide more liquidity, right? So you can do this you can use this voting as a way to manicure different thicknesses on pools. Another one, again, is the vampire attack. And then the final one that's a little interesting, sorry about having to move around, guys. The other one that's kind of interesting is when competition comes around. So one question you asked earlier was, are these people going to swap around on Uniswap or these other dexes, right? So again, we think of this as having shares in the company. So if you have shares in a company, you want it to be profitable. You want people to interact with it. So if Target was selling something cheaper than we were selling it in our store, right? We'd have to compete with their volume. So you could actually take the incentive token and actually try to buy business away from other pools. So let's say a project launches and those people choose to primarily put their liquidity in Uniswap or some other DEX that launches on Pulse. Well, we can say, okay, there's $20 million of liquidity in this new project here, and they're basically almost exclusively using another protocol. All right, well, let's vote, and let's say we're going to 10x the amount of reward token they receive to buy liquidity in Pulsex. So now you can take your swap fees and whatever on that other protocol, or you can come to Pulsex, and we're basically going to pay you extra to come provide that liquidity. So you can use it to be competitive against other dexes as well. So it functions really neat. And again, to keep coming back to, it functions like shares in a company. It allows us to add incentives to try to steal over market share in business. It allows us to manicure a liquidity pool by adding or removing incentive to thicken or thin. And it allows us to do large incentives for something like pairing the ERC20, PRC20 pair together and encouraging that behavior. So it's one of those things that most people haven't had to experience it because they're already working in very refined markets. But it's very powerful. And again, whether or not you ever choose to really get into these things and vote, just knowing that you can vote will make those tokens valuable because people are going to want you to vote with them. So it just adds to that sort of value proposition of the token.
Right. And doesn't that add another layer to the whale games though? Like somebody who only has a couple $100, $1,000 or something, or whatever it is, into whatever token that can afford them the votes, they're not going to have as much of a say. And so you get a whale, they can then do whatever the hell they want, right?
Absolutely. And whales can be misunderstood sometimes too. They do what's in their best interest, and money goes where it's treated best. So a lot of times if you see whales coming in and playing games, it's really not that common that they're evil, malicious actors with daddy's money out here trying to just smash the little guy. That happens, but most of the time it's someone who's got big bags, a lot of economic energy, who earn them, who's trying to take advantage of an inequality in the market. So of course that will happen, and if you're on the other side of it, sometimes you get bumped by a big whale, and it can be tough. But for the most part, they're acting in the best interest of the ecosystem because they have a lot of stake in that system, right? Elon is not trying to burn down Tesla. Bill Gates isn't trying to burn down Microsoft. And if you're Overwatch or C5 or these other huge actresses in Pulsex, they don't want to ruin a protocol where they have a huge stake.
Right, and that makes a lot of sense. I've heard some concerns as far as that goes, whether it be proof of stake or this voting mechanism with whales. But obviously, the people who have the most invested in these projects are going to want those projects to succeed in the long term. Now,
well, on that note, there's something I want to tease on, because with a lot of changes that have happened, at least here in the States, sometimes people forget how much of the benefits are attributed to something when they only see the cons, right? So that's a very fair criticism to say that, oh, well, proof of stake is outsized advantages for big players. Well, let's look at the other side with Ethereum, right? So Ethereum's not even the main chain. Ethereum Classic's the real chain. So with Ethereum, you had the chain get rolled back, you had the name stolen, you had miners extracting tons of value, and now you have a problem upgrading a proof of stake because of incentive misalignment. So how's that working out for you guys? Like, you literally got your brand jacked. You can't update. You can't compete with new layer ones. Of the top 10 coins, besides Ethereum, half of them are layer one competitors. How is this working out for you guys? Like, are we that happy about this proof of work system? It's, you guys are having problems because Kazakhstan has political instability. Half your stuff's in China. I don't even know who these miners are. So it's more than fair to be critical of proof of stake, but we should probably get our own houses in order and look at these things. The most successful cryptos right now, for the most part, are competitors to Ethereum. The E 2.0 is how many years out of past its initial idea for when it was going to launch. So Ethereum got the chain rolled back, and it's not even the original chain. So I'm willing to hear you guys out, but let's talk about where we're at, these pros. Like, it's not worked out well. It's the most successful DApp. It's lasted through a lot of turmoil. There's a reason that's the code we're forking. So we want to give all those guys a lot of benefit, and a lot of props to what they built. But again, design compromises are made for a reason. And whether or not Vitalik can vote, Vitalik has a huge amount of sway on where Ethereum goes. The difference is here, we can actually measure it with proof of stake. So they're fair compromises, but I don't think people have fairly scrutinized what proof of work's got them. They just keep saying decentralization as if that fairy tale word is going to get them back to Kansas. But sorry, guys, that's just not reality.
Right. And just staying on the proof of stake for a second, if I'm not mistaken, it has been more secure than proof of work. Like, there hasn't been as many problems as there have been on proof of work.
So security is an interesting thing, and the same thing goes to users as with networks. Most of the time, things get attacked. It's not giant brute force people trying to take down the network. Usually it's because devs screwed up. Ethereum got rolled back because of that attack, because there was an exploit. There's inflationary buzz. These are the things that take down networks, not a group of hackers drinking energy drinks in a dark building with their eyes covered. Like that's not where these things get attacked, right? They get attacked because of bad code. They get attacked because of bad federation and things. So most of the time it's user error. The majority of people who lose their funds in crypto are SIM card swapped because they have a naked MetaMask sitting on their phone. They connect to a DApp and give it all the permissions in the world. They hand their keys over to some attacker. So the majority of these things aren't about necessarily the hash rate or the staking method. It's usually about errors. It's errors in the code. It's errors in how people operate these things. So proof of stake has had less attack surface. But as much as that's sort of a feather in our cap, I think that we really need to look at just the majority of the time these things are attacked. It's from the inside. It's from bad code.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a really good point. Like Ethereum, I think they had public in the code as opposed to privacy or private, something like that, and that's why they had to end up rolling it back, and that's the only reason it got exploited. Yeah.
Right. So again, it wasn't the it wasn't anonymous. It wasn't this giant hacker group that came up with this cabal plan. We typed the wrong word in, right? The dev made a mistake. Now again, to be caveat and be fair, that dev is an incredibly talented person that I'm sure has more knowledge he's forgotten than me and you do. I'm on blockchain. So we are sort of, again, sitting on giants talking about these things theoretically. So the guy who made that mistake is a brilliant guy. But again, it just goes back to that's where the true vulnerability is in these things.
Right. And I know we've deviated sort of from the main topic at hand here. So I want to bring it back.
Sure.
Now, currently, at the time of recording, there's a sacrifice phase going on, and it's the last day at the day of recording where you can get 10,000 PLX sacrifice points for every dollar you spend. And then after this, it's going to be on a 5% bonding curve for,
Correct.
I'm not sure the exact days until, but I know it from start to finish, it's 47 days. And but let's say, the video doesn't come out enough in time for somebody to participate in the sacrifice phase. I've been doing my part outside of these interviews on like my daily TikToks to bring up the sacrifice phase. So I'm doing my part as it's live, but I can't guarantee the video will be out before the sacrifice phase. So if somebody, after hearing our conversation here, is really interested in the Pulsex, how can they acquire the tokens and, participate in the system?
Sure. So it's the same answer for that is really about participating in Pulsechain as a whole. All you really need to do is, again, assuming that sacrifice window is closed or the rate has moved up so far that you don't find it advantageous anymore, you can hold the little E. You can send a small amount, a few dollars to the Pulsechain sacrifice, and then you can hold all these ERC20s that are going to get airdropped, that are going to get forked that we discussed earlier. And then as soon as mainnet goes live, you'll be able to swap those over. So if you hold Shiba or you hold Chainlink or you hold Hex or Mana or any of these ERC20s, you'll be able to swap over, not the originals, you can hold those, but you can swap over those forked copies on Pulsechain into Pulse or into Pulsex at the time of launch. And again, participate in that way. You can DCA in, which is dollar cost average. So you can move all these mechanics over there, especially if you think that the ERC20 project that you're invested in, that's your community now, isn't going to participate heavily in Pulsechain. You can swap those immediately where they still have strong value in those liquidity pools and move them into Pulsex. So obviously the sacrifice early on is that would be the golden egg if you can. If not, you can be aggressive and move those forks in to Pulsex. And then shortly thereafter, we're going to have bridges open to Ethereum, likely other networks very, very shortly. We'll have fiat on-ramps, all these ancillary structures that we're used to seeing on Ethereum will be coming to Pulsechain relatively soon. And you'll be able to purchase and navigate and swap in all the traditional ways that people are used to.
Awesome. Now, one last final fun question here, pure speculation once again. A lot, there's been a lot of revisiting history as to what these other dexes have done as far as price appreciation in X amount of time. They're relatively new still. If I'm not mistaken, Uniswap was the first one and it came out in 2020 or 2019, somewhere like that. So they're very new. But we see some massive price appreciation. And as the tokenomics that we've discussed with Pulsex, and like I said, this is pure speculation, no financial advice, do your own research. Just to cover our asses here. But what do you think is realistic as far as price appreciation? Because so far we've seen Hex do from all-time low. I know they're unrelated, but all-time low 10,000x. People are speculating that Pulsechain will do what Ethereum has done, if not quicker. And so, do you think Pulsex is going to do something like Uniswap and Uniswap quicker, faster, maybe even higher amounts?
Pulsex is better. It's better tokenomics. It's launching in a more full way. It's going to have more volume. Something else that's interesting about the amount of volume those things have seen is that they're also working around the scaling issue of Ethereum's fees. So inside of the Hex community, we commonly will coach people to use Change Now or Dharma for smaller purchases to get around those fees. If you're in another community that's listed on centralized exchanges, people will transact there rather than the DEX because they can't afford to. In Pulsechain and with Pulsex, you'll be able to use crypto as it was intended. So we're going to pick up a large amount of volume simply because you can actually afford to use this stuff the way it was built for, right? So we see the cracks when it comes to the amount of capacity that Ethereum has, and people are scaling around it, but you won't have that problem in Pulsechain. So when you look at better tokenomics, what could easily translate to more volume, I think that trying to project the charts for Uni and Cake, I don't think the charts will be the charts will be shaped the same, and I don't think they're going to have the volatility of the upside that Pulsex will. So I would be hard pressed to look at the demand, the vibrancy in the community, and think that Pulsex won't outperform those coins by a lot.
Right. Yeah, I tend to agree. But Man, it's been a pleasure talking to you. You're very knowledgeable. Like I've learned a lot from you just speaking with you in this short amount of time that we've had. So I appreciate you coming on the show once again. And where can people find you?
Absolutely. Man, so I spent a lot of time in the Telegram rooms. I put up content on how to pulse along with the other great contributors we have. Twitter is not something that I really don't like to use social media that much, but because of the breakdown and how many rooms and things that have happened with the ecosystem getting very, very large and how to pulse, Twitter's become kind of a catch-all. So again, if people have any questions, Telegram is very, very easy to reach out to me. I'm there almost daily trying to spread the gospel, make sure that people are taken care of. And Twitter, and guys, I have zero problem trying to reach out and help people, especially if you're doing something that positive, that's positive EV for the system. If you are trying to bring in more communities, if you are trying to bring in large players, get with me. I'll be more than happy to help with outreach. I'll be more than happy to help with adoption. For the most part, if it's smaller questions, the Telegram rooms can handle that. But if for whatever reason joining the How to Pulse Telegram is very helpful, we do a lot of AMAs in there. But for some reason, all those things don't get your question answered, just reach out to me directly, guys. This community is my community. I'll do everything I can to help people out.
That's awesome. That's awesome, man. So once again, I appreciate you coming on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Man, been an absolute blast. Thanks so much. And hopefully we'll do this again in the future, man. Hopefully we'll be talking about where to spend all these gains.
Right. Exactly. I'm already thinking where can they go?
Right.
Exactly. But all right, man.